Jesus Trilogy, Book 1, The Four Messiahs, Chapter 32. Who were those camel riders? George looked up from his scroll. He had been reading by an oil lamp. It was 11 to 7 shift. With all the unrest in the region, Jerusalem's gates were now under 24-hour guard. George didn't like the hours, but it was relatively quiet. Last excitement was 2 weeks back when those 5 thugs were stopped at the checkpoint. A bag search, now mandatory for entering the capital city, turned up several weapons. They uncovered swords, bows, and torches. During the search, one of the thugs drew a sword and got the drop on one of the younger soldiers. He held out for 4 hours. Finally, the lieutenant from headquarters arrived and ordered the company to rush the guardhouse. The thug set fire to it. Both he and his hostage were burned to death. The sickening cries of the two still rang in George's ears, but it was the Roman way. Any act of treason, no matter how minor, was punishable by death. It was the law, Caesar's law. George thought they could have gotten a clean shot at the thug from the roof across the street, but the lieutenant ordered them to rush the place. George's good friend was now dead. The other 4 thugs were run through with swords on the spot. It still hurt to lose his friend, but this was Rome. Times were hard, but at least he was better off than the Hebrews. The private who had asked the question asked it again. Who were those 3 guys? How should I know? 3 guys crazy enough to be up at this hour can't be any trouble. Besides, they were on some pretty slow-looking beasts. Why don't those people ride horses anyway? George asked. I don't know, sir. Crazy, George muttered. But then he looked out the window and noticed a shadow made by his chair. Must be the moon. But then he realized the moon was in the west by now. He got up from his desk and ambled toward the east window. Looking out, his eyes widened. A star, brighter than the moon, was shining, as gleaming in the eastern sky, and it had a tail pointing toward earth, actually south from his perspective. Bethlehem, he thought aloud. What was that ruckus in the Herod's court yesterday? 3 guys talking about a star? Private, he yelled. Get in here now. Sir, the private appeared immediately at the door. Take over here. I've got to run an errand, Sergeant George ordered. Yes, sir. I should be back in an hour, George said. Private Blue was used to these errands. The Carmen mansion was only 4 blocks from the gate. Sergeant George went there maybe twice a week, always came back with a smile on his face, but also quite a bit lighter in the wallet. Blue had found that out for himself last May. 3 drinks and the main event took up the whole week's salary. Great time, but too rich for his blood. George quickly saddled his steed. He noticed his hands were shaking. He fumbled with a strap and finally was able to fasten it. He had no idea what was happening out there in the sky. Those 3 men might not have been crazy after all. I must ride out there and check it out. He would then take the news straight to Herod's palace. Surely if this was some new king and he was the one to inform Herod, he would be rewarded handsomely and maybe get a promotion. Colonel George, he thought. It had a nice ring to it. He urged Sally, his big Arabian, onto the road and took off at a gallop. The procession of the shepherds through the little stable was ending as each one kissed the head of the little baby. He cried a couple times when the men with scruffy beards kissed him, but otherwise he seemed inordinately calm for a newborn. He opened his eyes and actually looked around, first one way and then the other. He stared up at Chester and almost smiled. Joseph was only one of the company to notice this. Mary was obviously in pain, but through it she remained calm and always smiling. Flashbacks to Rachel's ordeal kept popping into Joseph's mind, but he focused on his son, well, God's son. No, the boy was his son too. He saw Florence check under the sheet and put a hand on Mary's tummy. Then she turned to Joseph and nodded. The relief he felt, combined with the joy he was experiencing, caused him to turn away toward Chester, tears welling in both eyes. He quickly regained his composure. He must stay strong for Mary and little Jesus. Mary had never felt so much pain in all her life. She was aware of some blood oozing down her leg now and then, but Florence reassured her everything was all right. Her pelvic area was one great searing ache, but her tummy felt so much better. Suddenly, miraculously, she was thin again. The last shepherd kissed the baby, and now Mary cuddled the infant in her arms. So precious, she thought. How could such a tiny baby grow up to be king of the world? She had no idea, but she vowed to do everything in her power to protect him and make sure he would someday become that king. Mary drew open her robe and raised baby Jesus up to her right breast, already swollen with milk. He eagerly began to suck the warm milk. She looked down at her tummy under her robe. No stretch marks, she thought. Amazing. Just then a white dove flew through the window and perched on Chester's back. The dove had a halo above its head. The light from it became intensely bright. Mary and Joseph squinted. Florence stepped back a couple of feet, and Victor shaded his eyes. To everyone's surprise, the angels in the room, numbering about 20, all knelt and bowed their heads. I am the Spirit of God, the Father of all the universe. Joseph never heard such a voice. It was crystal clear yet musical. They all felt the vibrations of the dove as it spoke. You are witness to the birth of my Son, in whom I am well pleased. He shall rule the entire earth with a rod of iron, and shall save his people from their sins, that they may join me in the mansions of heaven, my home. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for caring for my son. Your kindness will be remembered. The dove stopped speaking, and there was silence, save for the soft noise of the little baby nursing away in Mary's arms. Suddenly the light in the room became blinding. Everyone, including Chester, had to close their eyes. The light suddenly faded, and the dove was now perched on the head of the baby. To everyone's amazement, the baby and the dove stared intently at one another for a good minute. Jesus had stopped his nursing. After a minute, the intensity of the light returned, and just as suddenly waned. They all were seeing spots before their eyes, but the dove was gone. One by one, the angels exited through the door. Jesus, seemingly oblivious to all the activity, resumed his suckling. Come on, Ching, get your camel into gear. That star will begin to fade at dawn. Ab was leading the pack. We had to pull you out of the sack time and time again. Now you call us slow. Nahor shot back, ignoring the fact that this night Ab had been up first. Gentlemen, gentlemen. Ching was an easygoing man who always ended up being the peacemaker. There was good reason for this. Ching was a black belt in karate, and even in his 40s could take out any man in an instant. Not just take him down, but kill him. Nahor and Ab could testify to this. Nahor and Ab had been held up by a road gang 100 miles east of Tashkent some years before. While 4 goons were in the process of robbing the 2 at knife point, Ching Lin, who they did not know at the time, rode up on his camel. For the life of them, neither Nahor or Ab could figure out why Ching appeared from nowhere rather than riding the other way, but he just rode right up to where the 2 men were being held at knife point. Slowly he got off his camel and stood there, all 4'11" of him. The goons began to laugh. Then the biggest one, probably the leader, drew his knife and waved it in the Chinaman's face. Nahor and Ab and probably the other goons still talk about what happened next. Ching, with lightning speed, spun 360 degrees clockwise, caught the goon's hand with his foot, and the knife flew 30 feet across the road, embedding itself in the chest of one of the other goons, who slumped to the ground, dead as a doornail. The 3 other goons ran to their horses and tore off down the road. The 3 became immediate pals.